The lantern above the door had been burning long enough that a small halo of melted snow ringed the porch board beneath it. She stood at the foot of the steps for a long moment before she lifted her hand to knock, and when she lifted it, the light caught the split skin across her knuckles and the yellow bloom of an old bruise along the back of her wrist. She had walked 9 miles uphill since morning. She had 1 coin in the pocket of her dress and a folded scrap of paper pressed flat against her ribs beneath her shawl, and she had made herself a promise on the last switchback that she would not cry on this porch no matter what the man inside said to her. She knocked twice. Firm. The way a person knocks who is asking for work and not for pity. The door opened almost at once, as if he had been standing behind it, and the warm amber light from inside the cabin fell across her face and made her flinch. He was taller than she had expected. Bearded. A dark canvas coat thrown over a wool shirt. A face that had seen enough weather to become a kind of weather itself. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply looked at her the way a man looks at a track in the snow when he is trying to decide what made it. "I heard in town you needed a hand up here," she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Splitting, hauling, mending, cooking if you'll take it. I don't eat much." He did not answer. "I'll work a week for a bed in the barn and 1 meal," she said. "If I'm no good to you after a week, you send me down and you owe me nothing." He still did not answer. His eyes had moved from her face down to her hands, which she had folded in front of her without thinking, palms up, the way a person offers something. "Show me your hands," he said. She almost laughed. Almost. She turned her hands over slowly instead, palms down, then palms up again, the way she had once turned in a mirror as a girl deciding whether she was pretty. There were blisters at the base of every finger. A rope burn across the meat of 1 palm. 2 nails split down to the quick. "I can work," she said. "I didn't ask if you could work," he said. The wind rose. A dog somewhere back inside the cabin thumped its tail once against a wooden floor. He stepped aside from the doorway and tipped his chin at the warmth behind him. "Come in out of the weather. I'm not offering you a job. I'm offering you a chair and a cup of something hot, and after that we'll talk about what you actually came up here to ask." She did not move. "I came up here to ask for work, mister." "No, ma'am," he said. "You came up here to get away from someone. Work was the story you told your feet so they'd keep walking." She stared at him. He stood aside a second longer. Then, gently, without touching her, he added, "There's a bar on the inside of that door. You'll set it yourself. I'll sleep in the barn tonight." He turned and walked back into his own house and left her standing on the porch with the door open and the light spilling out across her boots. She stood there for a full count of 10. Then she stepped inside. His name, she would learn, was Caleb Ashford, and he had lived on Silver Pine Ridge for 10 winters without asking anyone in the valley below for anything except mail once a month and salt twice a year. Her name was Marin Vale, and until 3 days ago she had believed her name was something else. But that is getting ahead of the fire. The dog was called Juno, and Juno decided about Marin before Caleb did. The hound crossed the rug, sniffed the hem of her dress once, and then lay down across the toe of her boot with a sigh that suggested a long day was finally ending for somebody. Marin looked down at the top of the dog's head and felt, without warning, a hot sting behind her eyes that she refused to let out. Caleb had already gone to the hearth. He took a tin cup from a peg, poured coffee from a blackened pot, added a spoon of something from a small crock, and set the cup on the table across from the chair nearest the fire. "Sit," he said. He did not look at her as he said it. He was giving her a way to enter the room that did not feel like being watched. She sat. The chair was solid. The coffee had honey in it. She took 1 sip and had to set the cup down again because her hand was shaking. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday morning." He nodded once, as if she had told him the weather. He did not offer to feed her yet. He crossed the room instead and took his coat down from a peg by the door, and for 1 bad second she thought he was going to leave her alone in his house with a stranger's dog and a stranger's fire, and she did not know what she would do if he did. He did not leave. He carried the coat back to the table and laid it across the back of her chair. "Barn's warm enough for me," he said. "Loft's warmer. There's a lamp on the mantel. Bar the door when I'm gone. In the morning I'll ask you 3 questions, And if you answer them straight, we'll talk about what a week of work looks like up here. If you don't want to answer them, you take the coat and you take the dog for company down to the trailhead. And Juno knows the way to the Reverend's house in town, and no one on this ridge will ever know your face was here. Do you understand me? She understood him. She did not trust him yet because she had not trusted a man in 4 years, but she understood him. What 3 questions? She asked. He was already at the door. He paused with his hand on the latch and looked back at her over his shoulder, and the firelight caught one side of his face and left the other in shadow. In the morning, he said. He went out. She heard his boots cross the porch, heard the barn door on the far side of the yard slide open and shut. She sat with Juno's warm weight across her foot and the coat over the back of her chair and the honeyed coffee cooling in front of her. And she did what she had promised herself she would not do on that porch. She cried once, for about the length of a breath. Then she stopped, wiped her face on the inside of her sleeve, and got up to bar the door. Silver Pine Ridge sat above a town called Halden's Cross, and Halden's Cross sat in a wide crooked valley that a river had spent 10,000 years arguing with. In the summer, the valley was green enough to hurt your eyes. In the winter, it was the color of old iron. The town had a bank, a livery, a mercantile with a false front painted the year the railroad had promised to come and then not come, a church with a bell that had been cast in St. Louis, and a saloon that pretended to be a hotel on its sign. Above all of these, at the head of the main street where the road bent toward the pass, stood a 2-story house of pale stone with green shutters, and everyone in Halden's Cross agreed that the house belonged to a man named Ross Ballard, and that Ross Ballard was the sort of neighbor a town was lucky to have. Everyone in Halden's Cross was wrong about at least one of those things. Marin Vale had arrived in Halden's Cross 7 days earlier on the back of a freight wagon with a broken axle, and had gone straight to the Reverend's wife because a farrier's boy in the last town had told her that the Reverend's wife in Halden's Cross would sometimes hide a woman for a night. The Reverend's wife, a small square person named Ada Kettle, had taken one look at Marin's face and said, "Not in the parsonage. Not tonight. Ross Ballard eats his supper here on Wednesdays and he keeps his eyes." Ada Kettle had given her a heel of bread, a slip of paper with a name on it, and a direction. Silver Pine Ridge, Ada had said. Ask for Ashford. He won't want you, but he won't hand you back either. That's more than you'll get in this valley. Marin had not asked why. She had thanked the woman, tucked the paper against her ribs beneath her shawl, and started walking. In the morning the sun came up gray and slow, and Caleb Ashford came in through his own front door with an armload of split kindling and set it down beside the hearth without looking at her. Juno got up off the rug, stretched, and went to him. Marin had slept sitting up in the chair with the coat wrapped around her. 3 questions, Caleb said. He did not sit. He built up the fire. Ask, she said. 1. Is anyone hurt because you're not where they think you are? She thought about that longer than he expected her to. No, she said finally. Not hurt. Angry. 2. Are you running from the law? No. 3. He turned then and looked at her, and his eyes were not unkind. But they were the eyes of a man who had been lied to before and did not intend to be lied to again on his own hearth. Whose name is on that paper Ada Kettle gave you? She hesitated. The paper was still against her ribs. She had not taken it out even to sleep. Yours, she said. He nodded, as if that was the answer he had expected and also the answer he had feared. All right, he said. 1 week. Bon Luft. 2 meals. You split what I mark. You mend what I set aside. You do not go down to town alone. If someone comes up the road, you go to the root cellar behind the smokehouse and you stay there until Juno comes to fetch you. Are we agreed? Yes. And Marin, he said the name for the first time, and she realized she had not told him her name, and that Ada Kettle must have written it on the paper along with his. If you decide in 3 days that you want to go somewhere that is not this ridge and not that town, I'll take you as far as the rail spur at 2 Creeks myself. No questions asked and no debt owed. That offer stands until you tell me otherwise. She could not answer him for a moment. When she did, her voice was rough. He was already turning back to the fire. He spoke without looking at her. Because 10 winters ago a man on this ridge offered a girl a chair and a cup of something hot, and she made it through the night because of him. I owe him a debt I can't pay him back, so I pay it forward when the door knocks. He set the poker back in its bracket. That's the last soft thing I'll say to you before breakfast. Come outside. I'll show you the wood. He was as good as his word about the wood, and better than his word about the meals. He marked rounds with a stub of blue chalk, a diagonal line for splitting, a circle for the smokehouse, a cross for the stove length. He handed her a maul that was lighter than the one he used himself and did not stand over her while she found her rhythm. When she buried the maul in a round and could not free it, he walked past on some other errand and knocked it loose with the heel of his palm without commenting. By the second day, her hands were worse before they were better. By the third day, they were better. By the fourth day, she noticed something. The cabin had been built by a careful person. The joins in the timber were tight. The hearthstones were laid with a mason's patience. The shelves above the mantel were level to a hair. But on the mantel itself, in the center, there sat a small square tin box painted dark green. And the tin box was the only thing in the room that Caleb Ashford ever adjusted with his eyes. He never opened it. He never touched it in her sight. But when he came in from the yard, his gaze went to it before it went to the fire, the way a father's eyes go to a sleeping child. On the fourth evening, while she was ladling stew into 2 bowls, she asked him about it. She asked lightly, the way you ask about a book on a shelf. That box on the mantel. It's older than the rest of your things. He did not look up from unlacing his boots. It was here when I built the cabin around it. She waited. He did not say anything else. She set his bowl in front of him and sat down across from him with her own, and neither of them mentioned the box again that night, but she felt the shape of it in the room after that, the way you feel a low sound you cannot quite hear. On the 5th morning, a rider came up the road. Juno gave the warning long before the hooves reached the last switchback. The dog was on her feet at the door with her hackles smooth but her whole body still, which Marin was learning meant something different than an ordinary bark. Caleb came in from the yard without hurrying. "Cellar," he said. "Now, take the coat." She was already moving. He did not look at her as she went. He walked the length of the room, took a battered ledger down from a shelf, opened it to a page in the middle, and laid it on the table as if he had been reading it. He put a cup of coffee beside it. He hung his coat on the peg. By the time she was crouching in the earth smell of the root cellar behind the smokehouse with the coat pulled around her and Juno pressed warm against her side, the rider was in the yard. She could not see, but she could hear, and she had learned very young to hear. 2 boots on the porch. A knock. The door opening. Ashford. A man's voice. Not old. Not young. Confident in a way that had never been contradicted enough. "You've had a visitor, have I?" Caleb's voice, flat. Not a question. "Woman came up the ridge road 3 days back. My wife, as it happens. She's confused. Been a hard winter on her nerves. Doc in Halden's Cross says she wanders when the moon is wrong. I'm collecting her home." A pause. "What does your wife look like?" Marin, in the dark of the cellar, closed her hand around Juno's collar. "Yellow hair. My height at the shoulder. Bruises on her hands, poor thing. She works too much. Answers to Mary." Another pause. Longer. "No woman like that up here," Caleb said. "Only me and the dog and a whole lot of wood. You wouldn't lie to me, Ashford. I wouldn't waste the breath." Boots on the porch again. A saddle creaking. A horse turned. And then, from farther off, almost thrown away. "If you see her, Ashford, you send word. There's a purse in it. I don't take purses from men I don't drink with." The hooves went. Slowly at first, then faster once the road bent. Marin did not move. Juno did not move. The cellar door opened after what felt like a very long time. Caleb crouched at the top of the steps and looked down at her. And there was something in his face that had not been there before. Not anger. Not fear. A kind of grim recognition. "His name isn't Mary's husband," she said, before he could speak. "His name is Ross Ballard, and I was never his wife." He brought her back inside. He did not ask her anything until she had washed her face and warmed her hands and eaten half a slice of bread she did not want. Then he sat across from her at the plain table, folded his hands, and said, "Tell me only what you want to tell me. But tell me true, or don't tell me at all." She told him. She told him she had been married once, at 19, To a young man named Tomas Vale who had wanted to raise horses on a piece of ground his father had left him 3 days' ride south. She told him Tomas had died of a fever in their second winter and left her the ground and 2 mares and a debt at a bank she had not known about. She told him she had gone to the bank in the nearest town, a bank owned in part, though she had not known this either, by a man named Ross Ballard from a valley she had never heard of, and she had signed papers she did not fully understand to save the ground. She told him Ross Ballard had ridden down himself, 6 months later, to inspect his interest. She told him he had been kind at first. He had brought a hamper of food. He had fixed a hinge. He had called her Mrs. Vale with a small, careful pause between the words, as if he were tasting them. She told him what came after in 3 sentences, no more, no fewer. She did not describe it. She did not need to. Caleb Ashford's face while she spoke went through 3 separate weathers and settled on the last one, which was the coldest. She told him she had run, finally, for months back, with the deed to the ground rolled inside the hem of her dress and a single coin she had hidden in a jar of flour. She told him she had been 3 towns and 4 false names down the road when a farrier's boy in Salter's Fork had heard her ask about honest work and had said the name of a reverend's wife 2 valleys over. She told him Ada Kettle had said 1 word to her that no one had said in 4 years. Believed. Then Marin stopped. She unfolded the scrap of paper from beneath her shawl and set it on the table between them. It was not Ada Kettle's paper. Ada's paper had been a different one, and it was still in the toe of Marin's boot. This paper was older. It was creased into 8ths. It had been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases had begun to tear. This was my father's, she said. It was the only thing my mother kept when we left the valley she wouldn't name. I was 7. She died 3 years later. I've carried it since. Caleb did not reach for it. He looked at it a long time without touching it. Read it to me, he said. She read it. It was a plain page. Half a letter. The top had been torn away. What remained was 6 lines in a careful hand. Did what was asked. The ground above the falls is safe, though the ground below is not. I have set the stones as we agreed. If any of the family return, this paper and the mark on the west face of the boulder will show them the way. Tell my daughter, if she is old enough to understand, that her father did not run. He was sent. Jotfau. Caleb Ashford closed his eyes. He kept them closed for a long moment. When he opened them, he did not look at her. He looked past her at the green tin box on the mantel. JV, he said. Josiah Valley. You knew him, she whispered. I buried him, Caleb said. He did not open the box that night. He asked her, instead, to walk with him the next morning to a place on the ridge she had not been. They went at first light. The dog came with them. The trail ran along the shoulder of the ridge for a mile, dipped through a stand of aspens whose bare white trunks looked like a line of tall thin people watching, and came out on a flat shelf of stone above a narrow waterfall that fell into a pool the color of a green bottle. Above the falls is safe, Caleb said quietly. Below the falls is not. Your father's line. She looked around. There was nothing on the shelf except a great pale boulder, chest-high, weathered, half-buried in the frost-hardened moss. Caleb crossed to the west face of it and brushed the moss away with the flat of his glove. Cut into the stone, deep and clean, was a mark. It was a small square within a larger square, and inside the smaller square 3 vertical lines. It was the mark that had been stamped, in faded ink, on the top corner of the paper in Marin's pocket. Your father cut this, Caleb said. The winter I met him. He was surveying for a man he trusted. The man he trusted was not a man to trust. Your father figured that out too late, and then figured out one more thing, which was that if he set certain markers in certain places and hid certain papers in certain hands, the family whose ground this really was would one day be able to prove it. He turned to her. This shelf. That waterfall. The pool below. The 2 miles of timber down the north slope. The meadow on the far side of the pass. The town spring itself. All of it was patented in the name of Vale before Halden's Cross had a name of its own. Your grandfather bought it from the territory in 1849. Your father was riding the line to confirm it when he was killed. Killed, she repeated. Thrown from a horse, they said in the valley. I found him at the bottom of the north slope with a broken neck and no horse anywhere on this mountain that could have carried him there. I buried him because there was no one else to do it, and I kept my mouth shut because I was 19 years old and I was afraid. And I have lived on this ridge for 10 winters trying to earn back a silence I should not have kept. Maren looked down at the mark on the stone. Her father's hand had cut it. She had been 7. She was almost 29 now. Who was the man he trusted, she asked. Caleb answered her without heat, the way a person names a season. Ross Ballard. They walked back in silence. She thought she would feel more. She felt, instead, very quiet, as if a room inside her that had been full of noise for 20 years had just gone still. When they reached the cabin, Caleb took the green tin box down from the mantel for the first time in her presence. He did not open it in the room. He carried it to the table, set it in front of her, and stepped back. Yours, he said. It always was. She opened it. Inside were 3 things. A tarnished silver ring too small for any of her fingers, engraved on the inside with 2 initials. A folded page torn along the top edge in a way that matched, exactly, the tear along the bottom of the page in her shawl. And a photograph on a card, faded and yellow, of a young man standing beside a young woman on a wooden porch. The young woman was holding a baby wrapped in a knit shawl. The young man had Maren's mouth. She did not cry. She had cried already once at the beginning of this story. She had promised herself she would not do it again on this ridge until it was over. She set the photograph down carefully, closed the box, and put her hand flat on top of it. Tell me what to do, she said. Can't, Caleb said. Then tell me what you do. He thought about it. I go down to the valley, he said. Not to Halden's Cross. To the county seat. 3 days ride east. Take the paper. Take the box. Take the mark on the boulder. I'll cut a rubbing of it in wax before we go. File a claim of survivorship with the land office. Do it quiet. Do it clean. And then, only then, we come back and we tell Halden's Cross whose valley they've been living in. We, she repeated. He looked at her. If you want, he said. It's your name on the paper, Maren Vale. It'll be your voice at the counter. I'll ride at your shoulder if you want me there. Or I'll stay on this ridge and split wood, if that's the shape of it. It's your say. She looked at the green tin box under her hand. She looked at Juno lying by the fire. She looked at the man across the table who had asked her to show him her hands on a porch 4 nights ago, and who had, without touching her once, given her back the only thing she had ever really lost. Come with me, she said. He nodded once and turned to bank the fire. They rode east for 3 days. They did not speak much on the trail. There was no need. He rode a length ahead when the way was clear and half a length behind her when the way was narrow. When they camped, he made the fire and she made the coffee, and when she woke on the second morning with her cheek against her saddle roll and the sky pinking at the edge, she found that he had laid a wool blanket over her shoulders in the night. She said nothing about the blanket. He said nothing about it either, but she folded it herself in the morning, and she folded it carefully. They reached the county seat on the afternoon of the 4th day. The land office was a low brick building on a corner across from a bakery, and the clerk inside was a small round man with round spectacles and a green eyeshade. And when Maren unrolled the deed she had carried in the hem of her dress and set the torn paper beside it and laid the photograph on top of the ring on the counter, the clerk lifted his eyeshade, took off his spectacles, polished them once on his sleeve, put them back on, and said, very softly, well now. He asked her 3 questions. She answered them. He asked her a 4th. She answered that too. He went into a back room and they heard a drawer open and a book set down and a page turned and another page and another, and then he came back out with a heavy bound ledger in both hands, and he set it on the counter and turned it around so she could read it. Halfway down the page, in a copperplate hand from another century, her grandfather's name was written across a description of land that included Silver Pine Ridge, the North Slope, the waterfall, the pool, the meadow, and the spring that fed the town of Halden's Cross. The clerk asked her, very politely, whether she would like him to file the claim of survivorship publicly or quietly. She looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at her. Quietly, she said. For now. Public in 1 week. The clerk nodded. He wrote a receipt on a slip of blue paper. He stamped it twice. Miss Vale, he said, and it was the first time in 10 years anyone had called her by her true name in a room with a stamp and a ledger in it. "You'll want to be careful going home." They rode back a different way. They did not talk about what would happen in Halden's Cross. There was time enough for that when the ridge came in sight. They talked, instead, in small pieces of small things. He told her, on the second night, about a sister he had lost to scarlet fever when he was 12, and about a father who had drunk himself out of a farm in Missouri, and about the aunt who had put him on a westbound wagon at 15 with a good knife and a bad Bible and told him to make something honest of himself or not to write. She told him, on the third night, about the way her mother had braided her hair every morning until the winter she got too sick to lift her arms, and about a rocking chair that had gone with a landlord in payment for 2 months' rent, and about the first time she had ever eaten peaches out of a can, at 9 years old, in a boarding house in Kansas, and had cried because she had not known food could taste like that. He did not reach for her hand. She did not reach for his. But on the fourth morning, as they were saddling the horses in the gray light before dawn, he passed behind her to tighten her cinch, and his gloved hand brushed the small of her back for one bare second as he steadied himself, and neither of them mentioned it, and neither of them forgot it. They came home to trouble. Halden's Cross had not slept while they were gone. Ross Ballard had ridden up the ridge twice more in their absence. The first time he had found the cabin locked and the smoke cold and had gone back down. The second time he had brought the Reverend and the Reverend's wife, Ada Kettle, and a man from the bank, and he had stood in the yard and called out that Caleb Ashford's assessment on the ridge was 3 years overdue, and that a notice of tax auction had been posted on the door of the mercantile, and that the sale would take place in 8 days. He had not come back a third time. He had not needed to. Caleb read the notice out loud from the mercantile door on the afternoon they rode into town. The notice said what such notices say: back taxes, unpaid, property described, sale at public auction on the courthouse steps in the county seat in 8 days. The property described was Silver Pine Ridge. Caleb read it twice. He did not raise his voice. He did not tear the notice down. He folded a copy of it. There was a second one on the boardwalk post. Into his coat, tipped his hat to a woman he knew across the street, and turned to Marin. "Coffee," he said quietly. "Ada Kettles." Now, they walked to the parsonage together, slowly, so that anyone watching would think they were only two people walking. Ada Kettle met them at the side door with a look on her small square face that suggested she had been waiting all week. "He's told the town you're mad," Ada said to Marin, before Marin was fully inside the kitchen. "That your husband died and you've been wandering since, and that he took you in out of Christian duty, and that you slipped his house 6 weeks ago in a fit, and that he's been hunting you ever since to bring you back to a doctor. Half the town believes him. A quarter don't know what to believe. The rest—" She gave the smallest smile of her whole life. "The rest of us have been waiting a long time for someone like you to come up that road." "How long?" Caleb asked. Ada looked at him. 10 winters, Caleb Ashford. "About as long as you've been on that ridge." He set his hat down on her kitchen table and did not pick it back up for an hour. Ada Kettle was, they discovered over that pot of coffee, more than a reverend's wife. She had been born in the valley. Her father had been the first to say Clerk Halden's Cross ever had, back when it was still a mining camp with 3 tents and a roomer. She had grown up watching Ross Ballard's father buy the town one favor at a time, and she had grown up watching Ross Ballard learn from him. She had married the Reverend at 22, in part because she had loved him and in part because being the Reverend's wife gave her the one thing the Ballards could not take from her: the right to sit in every kitchen in the valley and be told the truth. She had known Josiah Vale. She had been the one who had cleaned him for burial after Caleb Ashford, 19 and terrified, had ridden into town in the dark to say a man was dead on the north slope. She had suspected ever since what Caleb had suspected, and she had done what a small square woman in a small crooked valley could do about it, which was to remember. She had kept a list in her head of every family the Ballards had bought out or driven off or wrongfully foreclosed on, in 20 years of being the Reverend's wife. She could name 11. "You'll make 12, she said to Marin. "Unless we stop it." "How?" Marin asked. Ada looked at Caleb. "You'll have to speak," she said. "In public. On the courthouse steps in 8 days. In front of the auctioneer and the county recorder and every Ballard hand who'll ride down for the sale. And when you speak, Marin, you'll have to speak your own name and your father's name and your grandfather's name, and you'll have to hold up that blue receipt slip like it's the deed to the whole world. because for 8 days out of your life it will be. Marin looked at her coffee. It had honey in it. Every cup of coffee she had drunk on this ridge or in this valley had had honey in it, and she had begun to suspect that this was Ada Kettle's doing as much as Caleb Ashford's. "I'll speak," she said. There were 7 days between that afternoon and the auction. On the first day, Caleb went back up to the ridge alone, at Ada's insistence, to be seen splitting wood, chopping ice out of the trough, and doing all the things a man does who has no reason to be worried. Marin stayed in the parsonage attic under a slanted ceiling and a clean quilt and read, for the first time in her life, an entire book from beginning to end. It was a book of Psalms. She did not become a religious woman on that attic cot, but she found, in one of the Psalms, a line about being lifted out of a pit of miry clay and having her feet set upon a rock, and she read that line 7 times, and she folded the corner of the page down, and that was that. On the second day, Ada took her, veiled in a widow's mesh she kept for such purposes, to visit 3 of the 11 families on Ada's private list. They sat in 3 separate kitchens. They drank 3 separate cups of coffee. They did not ask for anything. They only listened. In each kitchen, at some point in the conversation, Ada said, quite naturally, "There's a young woman come up the valley with papers of her own. I wonder if any of you ever kept papers of your own." And in 2 of the 3 kitchens, a drawer was opened, and something old and folded was brought out, and placed on the table and looked at. By the end of the second day, Ada had 3 signed statements in her apron pocket, from 3 different men and women, testifying to 3 different unlawful takings of 3 different pieces of ground by 3 different Ballard hands over 3 different winters. On the third day, Ross Ballard came to the parsonage for supper. Ada had told Marin that morning that she would need Marin to sit at that table. Not to speak, not to be introduced, to sit at that table in a plain gray dress and a blue kerchief and to be, for 1 hour of her life, a woman he did not recognize. "He hasn't seen your face in daylight in 4 months," Ada said. "You've lost weight. Your hair is different. You'll wear my glasses, which are too weak to be of use to anyone but a woman pretending. You will keep your eyes on your bowl. You will say nothing. You will be my visiting niece from Nebraska, and your name for the evening will be Prudence. And you will listen." Marin sat. Ross Ballard came in with the Reverend and hung his coat on a peg and shook the Reverend's hand and did not look at Marin twice. Ada introduced her as Prudence, "My sister's youngest. Come down to help me nurse a bad hip." Ross said, "Very good of you, miss." Marin said, "Kind of you, sir." Ross Ballard forgot her before he sat down. He talked over stew, about the ridge. He talked about Caleb Ashford as one talks about a stray dog one has decided to let sleep on the porch. He said Ashford had lived up there 10 winters without ever settling his assessment, and it was a shame, but the county was the county, and the auction would take its course, and he himself, out of neighborly duty, intended to bid for the ridge and hold it in trust for whoever the good Lord next sent up that road. He talked about a woman, then, whom he called only poor Mary. He said she had wandered off in the fall. He said he feared she had come to harm. He said he had ridden the country looking for her and had traced her. He believed as far as the ridge, and that the mountain man had denied ever seeing her, but that the mountain man had a way of denying things. He said all of this looking at the Reverend and once, briefly, at Ada. He never once looked at Marin. Marin ate her stew. She kept her eyes on her bowl. She said, "More bread, ma'am," once, in a voice that was not hers, and Ada said, "Please, dear," and passed the loaf, and their eyes met for half a second over the plate. And Ada's small square face did not move, but her eyes said, "Good. Keep going, we have him," and Marin kept going. At the end of the meal, Ross Ballard thanked Ada for the stew, thanked the Reverend for the blessing, nodded at Miss Prudence as one nods at furniture, and put on his coat, and left. Ada shut the door behind him. She stood for a long moment with her hand on the latch. "He is going to lose everything," she said quietly to the door, "and he does not know it yet." On the 4th day, Caleb came down from the ridge, and Ada told him everything about the supper, and Caleb went very still. "He was in this house," Caleb said. "He was with her at the table. He was." Caleb looked at the door for a long time. Then he said, "I want to tell her something. Alone." Ada looked at Marin. Marin nodded. Ada took her coat and went to visit a 4th kitchen on her list. Caleb sat down across from Marin at Ada's table. He turned his hat in his hands twice. I've been carrying a thing for 10 years, he said. I told you part of it on the ridge. I want to tell you the rest before we stand on those steps. She waited. The winter your father died, he said, I was 19 years old and I had been on that ridge exactly 1 season. I had built a lean-to and a smokehouse and nothing else. Your father rode up the trail one afternoon looking for a marker he had set the previous fall. He was tired. He was worried. He would not tell me what about. I made him coffee. He drank it. He told me his name and asked me mine. I gave it. He said, Ashford is a good name. Be worthy of it. And then he left and rode down the north slope, and I never saw him alive again. He turned the hat again. That night a man rode up to my lean-to. He asked me if I had seen a surveyor on the ridge. I said I had. He asked me where the man had gone. I told him. The man thanked me, gave me a silver dollar, and rode down the north slope after him. Marin closed her eyes. I did not know, Caleb said. I want to say that to you plainly. I did not know what I was doing when I pointed him down that slope. I was a boy on a ridge and a stranger asked me a question and I answered it. In the morning I found your father at the bottom of the north slope with his neck broken. And I have known, from that morning to this, that I was the one who told the man where to find him. He looked up at her. The man's name was Ross Ballard. I did not know his name then. I have known it since. I have lived on that ridge for 10 winters, Marin Vale, and every winter I have told myself I stayed there to keep an eye on the mark your father cut into the boulder above the falls, so that if any of his family ever came looking, I could show it to them. That's the true reason I did not turn you away on my porch. That's the true reason I asked to see your hands. I owed your father a debt I could not pay him, and when a woman came up my road with his handwriting folded inside her shawl, He could not finish the sentence. She reached across the table. She did not take his hand. She laid her own hand, palm up, on the wood between them. The split knuckle had healed. The blisters were gone. There was still a faint mark across the meat of her palm where the rope burn had been. He put his hand in hers. They sat like that for a long moment in Ada Kettle's kitchen, without saying anything else, and the clock on the shelf ticked, and the loaf under its cloth rose slowly on the stove, and outside in the yard a chicken made a small comment about the weather. "You did not kill my father, Caleb Ashford," Marin said, finally. A boy on a ridge answered a question. A man in a fine house did the rest. Do not carry the wrong piece of it any longer. There is not room in what is coming for both of us to carry the wrong piece. He nodded. He did not speak. She squeezed his hand once, and let go, and stood, and put the kettle on for more coffee. On the 5th day they made a plan. On the 6th day they rehearsed it. On the 7th day, they rode with Ada Kettle and the Reverend and 3 of the 11 families and a wagon with 3 bound ledgers in it to the county seat. They arrived the night before the auction and slept, all of them, in a boarding house Ada had chosen because its proprietor had once been foreclosed on by a Ballard. In the morning, Marin dressed in her gray dress and her blue kerchief. She did not wear Ada's glasses. She did not lower her eyes. She wore, tucked inside her coat over her heart, the blue receipt slip in its oilcloth pouch. She wore, in her right hand, the green tin box. The auctioneer read the notice. Silver Pine Ridge. Back taxes. Unpaid. Sale to the highest bidder with the county's blessing at the strike of the courthouse bell. He asked for opening bids. Ross Ballard raised his hand. He named a sum that was more than fair, and less than the ridge was worth by a factor of 10. He named it in the tone of a man doing his neighbors a favor. The auctioneer looked at the crowd. Any other bids? Marin Vale stepped forward. She stopped at the foot of the steps. She did not climb them. She did not need to. "I am not here to bid," she said. Her voice was clear. She had rehearsed it in Ada Kettle's kitchen for 2 days. "I am here to say that the property described in that notice cannot be sold, because the county cannot sell what the county does not own." The auctioneer looked at her over his spectacles. "Mum, my name is Marin Vale," she said. "My father was Josiah Vale. My grandfather was Elias Vale. Silver Pine Ridge, the north slope, the waterfall, the pool, the meadow beyond the pass, and the spring that feeds the town of Halden's Cross were patented in the name of Vale by the territorial government in the year 1849. That patent has never been sold. It has never been surrendered. It has never been legally foreclosed. My grandfather died. My father died. I did not. She held up the blue receipt slip. This is a certified receipt from the county land office, filed 8 days ago in this building, of a claim of survivorship duly entered in the ledger of Elias Vale's estate. The claim is public as of this morning. The clerk will confirm it. The county recorder, who had been standing quite still beside the auctioneer, cleared his throat. He said. He looked at the auctioneer. He looked at Ross Ballard. He looked back at the ledger in front of him. I can confirm it, he said. Ross Ballard turned very slowly. He looked at Marin Vale for the first time in 4 months. He looked at her in her gray dress and her blue kerchief on the courthouse steps in the falling snow, with a small square woman on one side of her and a bearded mountain man on the other, and 3 farming families with 3 bound ledgers behind her. And he opened his mouth, and Marin spoke first. You called me Mary in a valley where my name was Vale, she said. You told a town I was mad. You told a mountain man I was your wife. You rode down a slope 10 winters ago behind a surveyor who was not lost, and you rode back up without him. There are 11 families in Halden's Cross who can name 11 pieces of ground you took the same way. Ada Kettle has their statements in her hand. My father's mark is on a boulder above the falls on the ridge you tried to buy this morning. The mark matches the seal on his letter. The letter is in this box. The box is mine. She turned to the county recorder. Sir, I would like to formally withdraw the property described in the notice from public auction, on the grounds that it is not, and has not been, county property. And I would like to enter on the public record of this courthouse on this date the following declaration. That any claim on the property, or on the property of any Vale descendant living or deceased, made by Ross Ballard of Halden's Cross, is and has been unfounded. The recorder wrote. He wrote for a long time. He stamped the page. He turned the ledger around and asked Marin to sign. She signed. Her hand did not shake. The split knuckle had healed clean. The auctioneer looked at Ross Ballard. Ross Ballard looked at his own 3 men, who were, one by one, quietly stepping back into the crowd. He looked at Ada Kettle, who did not blink. He looked at Caleb Ashford, who did not move. He looked finally at Marin Vale. For one moment his face was the face of the man who had brought a hamper to a young widow's cabin and called her Mrs. Vale, with a small careful pause between the words. Then that face was gone, and what was left underneath it was something so much smaller than Marin had spent 4 years being afraid of, that she almost, for one bad second, felt sorry for him. She did not feel sorry for him. She turned. Ada Kettle put her small hand under Marin's elbow. Caleb Ashford stepped in on the other side. They walked her, slowly and without hurry, down the steps and through the snow and back to the boarding house, and behind them on the top step, the county recorder was already asking Ross Ballard 3 questions that Ross Ballard was going to find very difficult to answer. There was, of course, a great deal that came after. There was a trial, though not the sort of trial that leaves a scar on a valley. The 11 families brought their 11 pieces of paper, and the ledgers Ada Kettle had kept in her head for 20 years became ledgers on a table in a courtroom, and Ross Ballard's holdings, one by one, went back to the families they had been taken from, or, where the families were gone, into a trust in Marin Vale's name to be held for the town. There was a winter and then a spring. There was a day in April when the pool below the waterfall thawed at the edges, and Juno waded into it up to her chest and came out shaking herself all over Marin's gray dress. And Marin laughed so hard she had to sit down on the bank, and Caleb Ashford, who was 2 paces behind her carrying a coil of rope for a fence line, sat down beside her without asking and did not get up for a while. There was a summer, and Marin planted a row of beans along the south wall of the cabin, and they came up crooked, and she did not mind. There was a first frost and a second winter, and by the second winter the cabin had a second room built onto the back of it, and the green tin box on the mantel had been joined by a second box, a plain pine one in which Marin kept, folded, the blue kerchief she had worn on the courthouse steps. She did not wear it anymore. She did not need to. Ada Kettle came up the ridge once a month for coffee. The Reverend came with her when the weather allowed. Juno grew grayer around the muzzle and slower on the stairs, but continued, every evening, to lay herself across the toe of whichever boot was nearest the fire. Ross Ballard left Halden's Cross in the spring after the trial. He did not go far. He went, in fact, only 3 days east, to a small rented room in the county seat, where he lived on what remained of a personal account no court had touched, and where he was seen, from time to time, sitting on a bench across from the land office with a cup of coffee in his hand, watching the door as if he were waiting for someone to come out of it and tell him it had all been a mistake. No one ever did. Maren Vale did not marry Caleb Ashford quickly. She did not marry him for 2 full years. When she did, it was on the porch of the cabin in the fall on a day so bright the mountains looked painted. Ada Kettle stood up with her. The Reverend read the words. Juno, who was by then very old, sat on the top step and did not move for the entire ceremony except to sigh, once at the part about honor and cherish, as if to signal her approval. Maren wore her gray dress. She had mended it herself. It was, by then, the oldest dress she owned, and the newest thing about it was the small square of blue cotton she had sewn, that morning, into the inside of the collar, where no one but she would ever know it was. Caleb wore a clean shirt and the same dark canvas coat he had worn on the porch the night she knocked. There were no vows about obedience. There was one vow, spoken by both of them, that they would keep asking each other the true questions, and that they would keep answering them. That was enough. Late that afternoon, when the guests had gone and the plates had been washed and Juno had been carried, gently, from the porch to the rug by the fire, Maren and Caleb sat on the top step of the porch with 2 tin cups of coffee between them and watched the light go blue across the ridge. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small object and set it on the porch rail between them. It was a key, an iron key, longer than a finger, black with age, worn smooth on the ring end from a great many hands. "What's this?" she asked. "Front door key," he said. "The cabin's. You've never locked that door in your life." "I know," he said. "I found the key in a jar under the porch the winter I built the cabin around the box on the mantel. It's the key to the house your father was going to build here. The foundation stones under our floor are his. I kept the key. I never used it. I thought whoever was going to use it would come up the road one day and knock and I'd know." She looked at the key. She looked at her hands, which had healed a long time ago. She picked the key up. It was warm from his pocket. She put it in the pocket of her gray dress. They sat for a long time after that, watching the last light leave the pines, listening to Juno breathing on the rug behind them, and neither of them spoke, because they had already asked each other the true questions, and they had, for now, no more to answer. Somewhere below in the valley, a bell rang once, faintly, at the church in Halden's Cross. Snow began, very lightly, out of nowhere at all, the way snow will do in the mountains in the fall. One flake, then another, then a slow slant of them across the yard. Maren lifted her cup. Caleb lifted his. Steam rose from both. If the story stayed with you, share in the comments the moment you felt most deeply: the porch, the boulder above the falls, Ada Kettle's kitchen, or the key on the rail. If you enjoy original frontier tales of quiet courage, honest work, and the kind of second chances that get built one true answer at a time, you are welcome to sit by the fire with us for the next one. The lantern will be lit.